Hi, Pepa. Thank you for coming today. Hi, everyone. I'm Isis. I'm a dietitian, dance movement psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Pepa that gladly accepted to come for this conversation. For such a important day today, that is the 2nd of June, that's the Eating Disorders Action Day. It's the day that we usually talk about awareness and recovery. But on top of that, I like to talk about prevention as well. That is so important. And nowadays, with social media, influencers, diet culture, all that is even harder and harder to prevent. And so this talk today is also about doing an alliance between artists and health professionals to communicate about these topics with the greater population, and also talk about these in a way that people can understand and also feel in a different way rather than just using words, but also feeling from an embodied perspective. So I'll let you to introduce yourself, Pippa. Thank you so much again for coming. I'm super glad that this worked.
No, of course. I'm super glad that now you invite me. So I met Isis last year. She was part of a Q&A I did at the end of my play, Eating Myself, which is a show, a theater play that speaks about or reflects on the experience of a woman in their relationship with food and eating and cooking, and therefore her body and tradition and family around her. I am an actor, a theater maker, so I also write my own shows and end up self-producing them as well. I am from Peru and I live in London. I've been making work here, and I always make work that speaks to the audience, tries to bring a question that has to do with something that I believe needs to change socially or politically, but always trying to integrate myself into that discussion rather than exposing something without putting me in a position of vulnerability. So I offer who I am as well in the mix for those questions to be out there. So that's what I do. That's who I am.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. So yeah, and as Peppa mentioned, I went to the Q&A. I was super happy to be part of that. Eating myself, it really struck me, and struck me from a place like of being a woman and also being affected by all these external pressures, and sometimes even we don't have to go too far away to be like feel this pressure. Sometimes in the family or closer like social circles, this happens a lot, and including from health. And I think nowadays we have been talking more about from health professionals, that sometimes in an attempt to help but not really knowing how to, some health professionals can be more harmful than helpful sometimes. And watching your play, I remember having an embodied feeling of my heart was like, oh my God, I've heard so many stories like that from people that they have same like some same struggles, same challenges in their relationship with food and their own body. And I think your play can connect with people, that there were 1 in a million women there all together with you on stage, because there,
Mm.
and I could see that there was a lot of your own history and your ancestry there, like the history of your family and etc. But also there were many women there with you being represented, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that, and how was the process like. I know that has a lot of from your history, but like how was to, did you talk to other women? And then later I would like you to talk a bit more about your workshops that you're planning to do as well. That's gonna be
Yeah.
great, I'm sure. So thank you.
So the idea for the play started long time ago, years before I actually got to start writing about it. And I normally create from a space of something that is really bothering me, or like something that I repeatedly think about. And I spend myself, like, since I was a teenager up until the age of like my late 20s, thinking loads about my body, and especially within the frame of like, how can I be thinner? How can I lose weight? How can I fight with my body or against my body to try and like fit into something that I was definitely not, or a kind of like in a stereotype that was definitely not who I was, but where I felt like my happiness will be found in. So I spend loads of time doing like a very extremely in the peak of my experience in diet culture. I hit the peak at some point. It's safe also to say that I never experienced an eating disorder. I think I had a conflictive relationship with food, but I definitely haven't experienced a mental health issue completely on that. So I think that's also important to be said. I then experienced so much this intensity of losing weight and counting calories, and like trying to finally, after years of going in diets and from nutritionist to nutritionist, somehow like getting control of that, of my own journey on losing weight. And in that trying to get control, I sort of like reached levels of like absolute control, free control, that I was like amused with myself of like the places I reached, and the journeys I took my body to. And it was after an experience, I think I went through that. I lost loads of weight. That I was so concerned about these things, and I started talking to friends about it, like other women about it, and then eventually other men and other like just like people in general. And to my amazement, I discovered that everyone had the same questionings in their heads when they look at themselves in the mirror, of how much should they decide to eat, of places in which they are in social events and they are constantly thinking, am I eating too much? Am I not eating too much? Is this going to impact tomorrow? Loads of friends telling me about waking up and going to weigh themselves in the scale. The intensity of like, I know that I've gained 2 kilos, or I know that I'm not this size anymore. And the more I sort of started to talk about the very things that I thought were extremely personal and impossible to be replicated in other people, I discovered that everyone had it. Everyone had this level of intensity and like constraint and self-restrictions in so many different ways across culture, but specifically in women. And then I started digging a bit more in the relationship that they had with the kitchen, because I realized that I didn't have a relationship with cooking. And in the more I started digging in these themes, I realized that it wasn't only diet culture that I wanted to talk about in my play, but I actually wanted to talk about how that has a direct relation with gender stereotypes, but also ingrained patriarchal society that dictates that women first should stay in the kitchen, but once we got ourselves liberated from that, or like freedom from that, we got into this societal expectation of the women should nurture the children, should cook for others, but then not eat the food that they are cooking because they will get fat. So it's this kind of vicious circle that most women, we find ourselves into, because society has decided a box in which we should fit, that it's an impossible box. So it generates a very first relationship with something so fundamental as it is food in such a toxic way. So people that have a relationship, a positive or a negative relationship with food, is normally ingrained in the past and in the families and the stories of like context and culture and other people telling you things, or the lack of telling you things, or cooking for you or not cooking for you. So I had already came out of that, and I was at peace with myself. So I decided that that's something I want to talk about that period of time where Pepa was a different kind of person, and because I was amazed at the person that I transformed into, and how so many people were that person as well. So when I was writing the show, and this is something that I personally is one of the pillars of theater, I believe, and not necessarily everyone rules through that, but for me in theater, it's super important that the more specific, the more details, the more the closer look that you can have to a character on stage, the more the audience will be able to relate to them. So that's why I offer my story just as a means to actually talk about all women, or the experience of eating, or the experience of food, or body perception. So I'm not much interested in it being necessarily autobiographical, although of course it is, but it's there to serve a story of more people, and to offer others the reflection of themselves. And I think on the tour I did last year, that happened a lot. Loads of women and loads of people actually just in the show, as you know, but for people that might not know it, I cook a soup all throughout the show, and once the show is done, the soup is also done on stage, and it's a real soup. So I invite the audience to taste, if they wish to do so. And in that process, I've had numerous amounts of occasions in which somebody has said to me, "Oh, this is exactly like the soup my grandma used to make." And in the show, that's the soup my grandma used to make. And my grandma is obviously Peruvian, and from a Latin American tradition. But these comments I've had from people from Asia, from people with a heritage in different parts of Europe or Eastern Europe or other parts of Latin America, and everyone seems to be like, "No, that's the soup my grandma used to make," which is obviously impossible. But at the same time, very possible in our ways of imagining or like perceiving a piece of art that just makes us like
Bond.
that's my, and loads of women as well being like that was my story, like, thank you for telling my story, which is, I guess, like for me the maximum success of a piece of art, that it manages to really connect with somebody to the level of them feeling that was their story. So yeah, I think I spoke a lot.
No, it's perfect. And your play, I think, if we break down by the themes that you spoke so brilliantly, and we can spend like months and months talking about it because it's so rich and complex. Because that's it. Like, it's about the body, it's about the food, it's about food culture, and it's about that culture and the story of all these women being represented by that Pepa, that stage Pepa, that is also you Pepa. And yeah, it's just and I think you could really connect with all, and like all these people, even though they don't have, when they haven't gone through this, but there is this connection somehow. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Like, how do you think, for example, a play like Eating Myself could reach in terms of like helping health professionals, like in the sense of preventing or talking about it, not just like, not with the aim of like, no, I think we could do a program of prevention, but we could think about that. But I think it has so much room to reach, like, and I strong believe in these partnerships between and inter disciplinarities, that we break the walls of the disciplines, because like we can talk about like theater, this form of art, and reaching these places and talk about these topics that are so present to everyone, as you witnessed with the tour and all. And yeah, I'm just curious, like, and then you could talk a little bit about the workshops that you have been programming, like being developing and starting. And yeah, I'm just curious, and just to know if you think this partnership could work as well, like just
Yeah, so definitely partnering up like 100%. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about the workshops, definitely, because they started as a how can I beyond transcend the experience of the theater, and then perhaps like dig a little bit deeper into the experience that someone might have when they're watching the play. But I think for me, obviously, the play is not going to resolve anyone's conflict with a proper eating disorder. Like, I know that that's way heavier and complex in many ways, and like we all know how many barriers there are for accessing help in those terms. So I know that that's a kind of like impossible place to touch on. But at the same time, from the experiences that I got, or like the responses I've been given, I think somehow the experience of first perhaps discussing, but obviously like the art of like watching something performative live on stage, it always like opens up the heart in a different way, and perhaps the information gets to you in a different way than if you were to read an article or perhaps watch a documentary. But there's something that has to do with your own relationship with weight, so diet culture, that I think if you start breaking that theme of it being like, oh, it's only about how much I weigh. And if you start expanding that vision and you understand that you're not only questioning yourself in regards to the number that you see in the scale, you're questioning yourself in regards to the shapes that you have, that maybe you're comparing it to something else. You're also doing that because you are within a context of sexism and gender inequality. And if you go beyond that and you understand that, probably you've learned that from somewhere else in your family. And you go beyond that and you understand that you are restricting yourself in calories, perhaps not taking into account how many people die of starvation every year, and how important food has been perhaps in another period of your life, or or you haven't sat down to actually think about or recall the last time somebody made a meal for you, and how immense the expression of love that was, or somebody in your family, perhaps not your mom or your dad, or your dad's or your mom's, that maybe that's why you don't have that relationship with it. But if you can recall a friend or the neighbor or a guardian once preparing food so I think like when you start unpacking the idea of like, I just want to be thinner, or I just want to lose weight, and you understand that, because I think that's what the play does, sort of like it covers it from different angles until the protagonist realizes that what she's looking for is her happiness, and she believes that the happiness she's going to find once she looks at the scale and she's whatever fits in whatever size. But once she sort of achieves that and she realizes that that is anyhow impossible, then other stuff starts to open up for her to realize that regardless of that, she's still not happy. And that's probably because she hasn't fully understood the relationship with herself as a person, herself in her relationship with her family, herself in her own self-love, and therefore her capacity for her to love others in a romantic sense. I think like the possibility of opening that very narrow vision that we have when we are like pushing for a number to appear in the scale, and when we start to look at it in a more holistic way, which I think like nowadays nutritionists are trying to bring in ideas of like psychology as well, of like where is your heart at, in a way. I think it's very helpful, I think. And so I think that's what a play can sort of do somehow, like, because it's telling you the story of somebody, and the story of somebody is complex in so many ways. It encompasses so many different layers. So I think that has been interesting. Like also like perhaps men that I know personally loads of men that have gone through the same issues through a different lens, that is still served by sexism in the way that they are even more not allowed to even talk about these things, although they might like find it like they really want to achieve certain stereotypes. They won't even talk about it because of like it's part of like the patriarchal state of things, etc. But I have loads of guys telling me like, when I was watching the play, I realized that I don't have that story. Like I never had that second thought when I was eating a second plate or something. But then as the play unraveled, and it was like adding all these other layers of complexity that have to do with, oh, well, where that plate come from, or who cooked for me, or the lack of remembering who cooked for me, because perhaps nobody in my family did that for me. So I never experienced that expression of love. in that sense, or like they realized that this was also about them. So that was also really interesting, of like even people that haven't had a conflicted relationship with diet culture either have been able to witness it, unfortunately, through other people, but also can relate through all the sides, because we all eat every day, multiple times. And we all have a kitchen. In every single home there is a kitchen, because it's an essential part of, because it just keeps us humans alive. So it is very relatable. And I think that complexity allows you to also question yourself, like, am I just eating every day without even thinking, where is this coming from, or why am I doing it in this way? Am I just following a pattern? Am I, is there a chance that I can bring back I don't know, the heritage of my family, or like the memory of my great grand auntie that used to do this thing through this act of love? Like there's so many possibilities once you go away from that very like narrow way of seeing something. So yeah, that I think that's what the play might do to people. Hopefully does to people. And then I developed this workshop called Eating Stories, which I run last year in Nottingham as part of the tour. And then this year I'm embarked in this new, like, hoping to get some funding to do it again with like vulnerable or like underrepresented women, female communities, either migrants or global majority, to offer them the possibility of like creatively think about these themes. So the workshop includes some movement exercises, some storytelling exercises. Everything is very like imaginative, and like it opens the space for people to feel comfortable about it. But there are exercises, loads of them, about free writing, where I ask participants to give a little bit of this description, an imaginary description of their bodies. So it's called like a description of my body to a stranger. Trying to bring in the ideas that we don't only describe our bodies in a literal way of like, I have 2 arms and two I have short hair, etc. But I also have I have the color skin that my mom never had. I have the same black dots that my dad carried, and his dad carried, and his dad and his dad. I have the hands of my grandmother, and every time I see them, I see her. So there's ways of poetically describing yourself that is strong, because we are what we say about ourselves as well. And in the context of the workshop, every women or participant brings to the workshop a dish that they've cooked at home that reminds them of home. And that is a very open statement, because some people might not have food that reminds them of home, and maybe the food that reminds them of home is a pack of Cheetos. Like that is as valid as someone who has, incredibly difficult to do tamales made at home because grandma used to do that for them. So I think that reveals loads about us, the food that we claim as like homey. So everyone brings the dish, and there's loads of exercises around like mindful eating, really, of observing the dish, smelling the dish, before you even get to really taste it. Women or participants get to swap around the dishes, so these dishes come with a little bit of a paragraph that tells you about like where the dish comes from, that the other participant has written. So it's a very like communal experience that tries to slow us down from the very act of eating that happens in such a like manic and fast way, and tries to put the gear on, so we don't immediately go like, there's food, like let's eat it, but kind of like, okay, what can you get from the colors of it? Is there anything that reminds you of home? Where does food eat? I also ask sit in our bodies. I also ask participants not to talk in the first part of the exercise, so it doesn't immediately become that social experience that we always have, where we're just eating and talking, but kind of like slowing down again and like having a moment for you to perceive this immense act of love that a stranger has done for you, essentially. And then there's another space in which everyone can talk and like you can go and have a look at everyone else's. But it does create a sense of, or at least that's what the participants have shared with me afterwards, is this sensation of first being part of a community that might have not been there before, participants that even didn't know each other, but in this expression of having the space to talk about their bodies and who they are, and what food means to them, and how complicated or beautiful that is. There is a sense of like camaraderie or like support or community building. And for lots of them, it has been the chance to actually look at food beyond that very daily transaction, or even painful transaction of I'm having to eat this that then I know will put these extra kilos on me, but rather like, oh, I'm having this experience with this incredibly precious thing that has been given to me, with carrying all these beautiful things that are cultural, that are traditional, that are, that come from the specific story of this other participant. So it's a way of sort of like re-engage with food. So I think this is a first step for me to start bringing these workshops to people that might not do something creatively normally, and might not have the time and the resources to think about food in a different way. And put them all together and see what they get out of that. So yes, this is my plan this year, is sort of like getting partners and companies and also like charities and organizations to be interested in this workshop, and how can we run it with their group of people or around their community.
This is incredible. And yeah, I think it's really important to bring this different perspective, because like many people, they eat while they're working. They don't have this time to stop and think and savor the food. A lot of people have lost that, or they have never introduced to that, depending on their culture, their stories around that. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's amazing project, and I'm really glad that you're developing it. And I'm really glad that you had the time to come here and talk about it. Yeah, and would you like to share anything else? Any impactful phrase or something?
Just like a little bit about the project, a little bit more, is that I'll be running 2 of those workshops openly for anybody. So that will have a cost. It's a donation that will then help us run the same thing for people that might not have the money to pay for something like this. So around like 100 women will be benefited from your collaboration, you taking part in this workshop, that hopefully will get something for you as well. And all of this process will culminate in an exhibition that is hoping to gather the experiences of women, and also bring some food in the space as well. So people that are attending the exhibition can also have a little bit of what this means, of this experience of doing these exercises creatively to relate to your own experience. And yeah, I think for me, again, like I haven't like won like the immense war against our very subconscious bias, again, given by the context and the society that we grew up in. Definitely I'm far from it, but I can say that I have developed a much better an extremely better way of seeing my body and who I am, and like 100% loving myself, and like being patient with me and grateful. And I think loads of that has to do with understanding that I was seeing one thing, and I wasn't like really taking into account
the
the
whole
amount of
context.
the amount of things that my body does for me, and also the sacredness of the ancestors that come before me, and the grandmothers and like their grandmothers that did so much for me to be here. So this, I think, in the most hippie way, there is when you understand, when you bring the idea of love, but like an honest love, I think very like harsh words that we say to ourselves start to soften. So I think, yeah, I don't know, I think that's what I wanted to put in the table in the
And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, Yeah, I really believe, and it's a very hopeful message that we can have a better relationship with our own bodies and we can have a better relationship with our food. And I like a phrase from the dialectical behavioral therapy that is, we can live a life worth living if we start like having these especially if we start having these reflections and especially thinking about it in community, because that's what you're bringing as well with your project and the workshops and the play, bringing people together and thinking about it together and working through these shared experiences, even though sometimes they're a little bit different from one another, but they have connections, as you mentioned. And how powerful is that? And I really believe in the power of community and the power of group. And that's why I love your play and your project, because I think it brings everything together. It brings art, it brings people, it brings community, cultures, like even the idea of health professionals being involved in it. And it's super powerful, super potent, and in the sense of like making real change. And that's why I love arts. I think arts, they have the power of changing reality, but from a different place, from a holistic place, that we feel that in all ourselves, in our own body, and not just like thinking about cognition and this very straightforward thinking. It's much more complex, but I think when people feel, it stays and make a true impact. So I'm really looking forward to even experience your workshop and seeing the exhibition. And if you send me the details, I can put in the video as well, and I can support with the advertising. And yeah, and thank you so much for sharing all that today with me and with everyone that is gonna watch the video. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you, Izzy.
Thank you.